Hello and welcome to another episode of Study Sessions. Now, a bit different today. We're going to be looking at setting and place in A Christmas Carol. The reason why we're doing this is that setting and place and location, they've never come up before in the exam, and we might feel slightly thrown, even though we would have things to say about setting and place, we might feel slightly thrown as to how to approach the task and how to connect setting and place to the novella's broader preoccupations with social responsibility, compassion towards the poor, generosity, a kind of humane attitude towards others, all of those sorts of things that we already know about. How can we connect that to setting and place? Now, the overarching approach of this episode is to connect setting and place to the moral character of the individuals who inhabit those specific settings and places. So it's clear that Scrooge's counting house, on some level, is an articulation of Scrooge the man and Scrooge's moral character. Same with the cemetery descriptions and so on. So that's our kind of overall approach to it. What I want to do in this episode is work sequentially through the text, thinking stave by stave, what locations and settings and places do we encounter as readers? And then what do those settings and places have to say about social responsibility and indeed about the moral natures of the characters that inhabit them? So we're going to start with stave one, thinking about London's fog, thinking about Scrooge's emotionally cold office, as well as the fact that it is literally cold, and even the arrival of Marley's ghost in terms of where Scrooge is living, Scrooge's apartment. Now, the novella opens on a dark and wintry day in London. It's actually 3 o'clock. And Dickens uses the wintry city itself to, of course, mirror Ebenezer Scrooge's icy heart, emotionally cold heart. Outside Scrooge's counting house, Dickens describes cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal. We read that candles were flaring in the windows of the neighbouring offices like ruddy smears upon the palpable brown air as the fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole. So, in other words, the London air is filled with oppressive fog and a strange, rather almost unnatural early darkness, even though it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. In fact, it had been quite dark already, Dickens writes. It had not been light all day. And the dampness and the gloom press in on Scrooge's bare counting house. It's a harsh, fog-bound city setting, and it's a setting and location that emphasizes and reinforces Scrooge's isolation and miserly detachment. Inside the office, okay, don't forget poor old Bob Cratchit's dismal little cell. There's a great deal to say about that sense of imprisonment, the sense of restriction, kind of oppressive exploitation of poor old Bob Cratchit. But it's also worth remembering that Scrooge keeps only a very small fire. That symbol of a fire or a hearth, sometimes as it's referred to, where it's something more substantial, really, really key. There's a connection between the size of the fire or the image of the hearth and feelings of togetherness, family, human relationships. Now, Scrooge, of course, in stave one, Cold Scrooge, of course, has a very small fire. And his clerk, Bob Cratchit, only has a fire that looks like it's one coal. Now, it reinforces the physical coldness of Scrooge's place of work. Dickens even notes that Scrooge carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. Now, I speak in a separate episode about the language, the conceptual metaphor, really, of temperature. But even putting that to one side, all this imagery of ice and fog and darkness, all surrounding Scrooge in stave one, underlines that theme of emotional coldness, social isolation, edging his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. It's worth remembering, too, in Victorian London, winter and fog were actual, real hardships, but here Dickens is linking them and the harsh climate to Scrooge's grating voice, those thin lips blue, suggesting that Scrooge is as unwelcoming and as unforgiving as the weather itself. Now, Scrooge's own house, where he's living himself, is described, as one might imagine, as grim and forbidding. His lodgings are a, quote, gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of building, hidden behind a dark courtyard. The narrative says that the building was so neglected that one could scarcely help fancying or imagining it must have run there when it was a young house playing at hide and seek. Now, we might have forgotten a little bit about this interesting image and metaphor that Dickens gives us. This idea that the location of the house is so odd, so separate, and therefore so neglected, that you would imagine that when it was a young house, like the house as a child, that it's lost its way and it's got stuck there and it's forgotten about. What a wonderful way, metaphorically, of thinking about Scrooge himself, who, in some senses, lost himself as a young person, as a young man, and hasn't, up until the supernatural intervention of the ghosts, hasn't found his way back. Okay, there's a lovely connection there between the location of Scrooge's apartment, those gloomy suites of rooms, and then Scrooge the man and Scrooge's moral character. Outside Scrooge's front door, the fog and the frost hung about the black old gateway of the house, that it seemed as if the genius of the weather sat in mournful meditation on the threshold. Dickens is personifying here the weather as brooding gloomily on Scrooge's doorstep, and that, again, enhances the eerie loneliness of the scene and the eerie, lonely isolation of Scrooge himself. This setting, that shadowy Victorian alley, it's filled with cold and fog, immediately links Scrooge's home to that theme of social isolation. It is old and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge. The dark courtyard and foggy, gloomy weather suggests that Scrooge has shut himself off from the warmth of human connection and society itself. So in this way, the harsh London setting in Stave 1, the fog-bound street, and of course Scrooge's frigid office and home sets the stage for Dickens's moral lesson. By showing Scrooge surrounded by, situated within such gloom, Dickens prepares us for how out of harmony Scrooge is with the world and the cheerful spirit of Christmas, and how removed he is from family and human connection at the beginning of this very famous story. Now we're going to turn to Stave 2, and we're going to be thinking obviously about the ghost of Christmas past and where Scrooge finds himself with this ghost and why these locations and settings are so important. So in Stave 2, the ghost of Christmas past takes Scrooge to earlier scenes of his life, and the settings there reveal both tender memories but also painful regret. First, the spirit shows Scrooge the old schoolhouse where, as a neglected boy or a solitary child, is left there still. Dickens describes the school as a mansion of dull red brick with a little weathercock on the roof and a bell hanging in it. The building is once grand, but seems now run down. Its spacious offices were little used, their walls were damp and mossy, their windows broken, and their gates decayed. Chickens cluck away in the empty stables, and grass has kind of overrun the sheds outside. It is a neglected place. Inside, a long, bare, melancholy room is sparsely furnished with wooden desks. The only light is a feeble fire by which young Scrooge reads alone. Dickens here is emphasizing that everything in this scene is silent and still. Not a latent echo in the house, not a squeak and a scuffle from the mice, but fell upon the heart of Scrooge with a softening influence. This is a quiet, empty school setting. It's cold, bare, and forgotten. And it underlines really how lonely Scrooge's childhood was. It connects to those themes of family and human connection by showing the pain of Scrooge, young Scrooge, sitting by himself at Christmas, making the sight of other families later all the more moving. Then the ghost of Christmas past takes Scrooge to Fezziwig's Christmas Eve party, and it's at the warehouse where Scrooge himself was once apprenticed. Now, the setting is transformed. It's transformed into warmth and cheer. The warehouse, that seat of enterprise, of commerce, is cleared and tidied instantly. Every movable was packed off, the floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel, crucially, was heaped upon the fire. When the workmen open the shutters, the place becomes as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night. In this cosy, well-lit hall, in came the fiddler, Mrs. Fezziwig, the three Miss Fezziwigs, all the young men and women employed in the business, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, in they all came, anyhow and everyhow. This is a place full of life and laughter. Note the contrast between the lonely school, Scrooge's dark home, and of course, Scrooge's counting house. Fezziwig's warehouse is a communal, festive setting in which generosity and joy abound. Dickens is using Fezziwig's warehouse, this setting, to highlight the themes of benevolence and human connection and the joy in Christmas. Note the physical warmth of the warehouse, the roaring fire, the good food, the dancing. All of this mirrors the emotional warmth of caring employers and cheerful friends. By showing Scrooge grinning at Mr. Fezziwig's kindness in this open, bright space, Dickens links it to the setting of the spirit of Christmas. Okay, this idea that Christmas is, to quote Fred from Stave 1, a kind, forgiving, charitable time. It's not a time for business and worry. In short, the young Scrooge, and indeed the older Scrooge, sees in Fezziwig's ball a perfect Christmas scene of love and goodwill, set out in a humble warehouse. But it's a happy place, and it helps him realize how he will ultimately choose between feasting in terms of the Christmas spirit or floundering in terms of Christmas spirit in later staves. Now, the opening of stave 3 is also really important when it comes to setting and location, because we get the transformation with the arrival of the second spirit, the ghost of Christmas present. We get the complete transformation, really, of Scrooge's room. I want to give you the full description of that transformation. Of course, it's a transformation that is mirroring Scrooge's own moral metamorphosis, his own moral transformation. So here's the full description. It's a great piece of writing. Quote, "It was his own room. There was no doubt about that." So we're in Scrooge's bedroom. But it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceilings were so hung with living green that it looked, this is a great quote to remember, a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there. And such a mighty blaze, note the fires again, went roaring up the chimney, as that dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time. As in, the fire, the blaze, that mighty blaze is so intense, roaring up the chimney, that the fire itself is not normally, the hearth itself is not normally accustomed to that kind of fire. Normally it's accustomed to dull petrification, a kind of stony deadness. I'd never known it either in Marley's time or for many and many a winter season gone. Heaped up, okay, just like the fuel in Fezziwig's factory, heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne with turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat. And so it continues, this huge, long, wonderful list of the abundance of Christmas, a cornucopia, okay, much like the horn of plenty that the ghost of Christmas present himself carries. In easy state upon this couch, which is made basically of food, there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch, as I've just mentioned, in shape, not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping around the door. So, that transformation of Scrooge's room is in part a reflection, again mirroring the growing transformation taking place within Scrooge's own heart. Now, the Ghost of Christmas Present doesn't just stay here. He carries Scrooge through some very different locations all around London and indeed beyond. And what he does is he uses these different locations and settings to show, demonstrate, and celebrate the diverse ways different people celebrate Christmas, even celebrating Christmas in all sorts of challenging locations. One key scene, of course, is the humble Cratchit home. Now, Dickens paints the Cratchits' evening as gentle and content, even though they are existing clearly in poverty. The family's rather meagre Christmas feast has ended. The dinner was all done, the cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. Coal and chestnuts burn in the grate, and everyone drew around the hearth. There's the hearth again. In Scrooge's mind, the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and cracked noisily, and then, of course, famously, Bob Cratchit proposes a toast. Tiny Tim joins in. God bless us, every one. Notice the setting. A small room made homely, comfortable, cosy by the fire. A humble firelight instead of grand lamps. A tiny spread of food. Dickens focuses on these simple details to show that love and happiness can thrive even in the poorest setting. The quiet, familial warmth of Bob Cratchit's house, every member sitting close together, grateful for what little they have, contrasts markedly with Scrooge's lonely office and apartment, the gloomy suite. It underscores one of the key themes, the theme of family but also of compassion. Even though Scrooge scorns charity, here in this snug room, with the family drawing around the hearth in mutual support, we get this place. Yes, it's poor, but it radiates the true spirit of Christmas through love. The Ghost of Christmas Present also shows Scrooge that the Christmas spirit, as I've mentioned, extends far beyond one mere home. The spirit takes Scrooge out through several streets familiar to his feet, and even into some rather bleak landscapes. At the top of a windswept moor, they glimpse a miner's cottage, a place where miners live, who labour in the bowels of the earth. Peeking through the cottage window, Scrooge sees a cheerful company assembled around, guess what? A glowing fire. An old man and woman with their children and their children's children, all decked out gaily in their holiday attire. Outside, even on a lonely, rocky sea kind of island lighthouse, two weather-beaten men still are able to celebrate Christmas by a small fire they've made, singing to kind of keep themselves company. Even high on the open ocean, the ghost shows sailors on a ship, all humming carols despite the storms they face. These vivid settings, miner's hut, lighthouse, the deck of a ship, they emphasize that goodwill is not confined to wealthy city folk. No matter how hard life or how bleak the landscape, Dickens is showing us that through these different settings, these different locations, people still nurture a kind word for another on that day. The festive decorations, garlanded old folks, sailors humming tunes, and communal fires, it's really key, in these scenes link place and theme. Even in the bowels of the earth, or on a wild, stormy sea, the spirit of love and human connection endures at Christmas. In fact, the spirit of love and human connection are the spirit of Christmas. However, the Ghost of Christmas Present also reveals the darker side of society that's hidden in these scenes. Beneath its tattered robe, the ghost shows Scrooge two starving children, ignorance and want. Dickens' setting, two wretched figures at the ghost's feet, dramatizes a moral warning. Remember the girl and boy described as yellow, meagre, ragged, scowling wolfish, where graceful youth should have filled their features out, devils lurked and glared menacing. These grim images of poverty, crouched on what we might consider by the feet, on the very doorstep of Christmas, force Scrooge and the reader to face society's neglect. They are man's, of course. They're not shown in a specific building, but they're placed on the outside of the garment, and the ghost's gesture towards a city links them to every neglected corner of the country. We've got to look at that in some more depth in the next day too. By placing ignorance and want at Christmas in this unsettling tableau, Dickens underlines that theme of social responsibility. He's reminding Scrooge that while many gather in warm homes, others exist in derelict places on the outside, places marked by hunger and sickness. In short, even joyful settings carry shadows, and Dickens uses the stark location of these two children to urge compassion towards the poor. Okay, now, the penultimate stave, stave 4, we're thinking about the final spirits, the ghost of Christmas yet to come. Thinking about streets, we're thinking about the images of death and, of course, neglected graves and cemeteries more generally. Now, the ghost of Christmas yet to come shows Scrooge chilling visions of the future in a sequence of grim settings. Firstly, and sometimes we might forget this, the spirit takes Scrooge, the ghost of Christmas yet to come, takes Scrooge to the business heart of London on the Exchange, where merchants would be found hurrying to and fro. Dickens writes that they, quote, scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them and encompass them of its own act. But there they were, in the heart of it, on 'Change, or by the Exchange, among the merchants. Here, in a busy street of tall buildings, men chat casually. One of them says, "I only know he's dead." The setting is impersonal and it's commercial. Money clinks, hats are tipped, but what's absent is humanity, compassion, grief, and respect. This cold yet bustling, mercantile, commercial place highlights Scrooge's fate if he stays miserly. The fact that these businessmen assume the stranger's death means little, "He hasn't left it to me," one of them says, emphasizes that in this setting, human connections are shallow, they're purely transactional. Dickens uses the crowded, indifferent city and the city streets to show how no one will mourn Scrooge's death if he remains as he is. I also want you to think about the way the spirit leads Scrooge through the city to actually two of Scrooge's acquaintances. It's quite a specific moment. So in again, another London street, two wealthy rich men, businessmen, like Scrooge, meet briefly, and one quips, "Old Scratch has got his own at last, eh?" Basically what he means is that the devil has claimed Scrooge, has claimed the miser. Now, the setting is not described in this moment in lots of detail, but their matter-of-fact talk in a street signifies the same impersonal world. Even acquaintances in this world joke at Scrooge's demise. Again, we've maybe got the sort of indifference of the modern city creeping in there too. Then we turn, or the ghost of Christmas yet to come takes us to the moment where Scrooge's kind of servant woman, Mrs. Dilbert, is selling off his things. She's pawning them with to a character who's known as Joe, or Old Joe. I was going to think about the location where Old Joe is doing his rather shady business. They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of town where Scrooge had never penetrated before. So he's never been there before. Again, this sense that there are areas, parts of the city that are hidden and obscured from Scrooge, I think is important. They're associated with threat. Dickens writes, although he recognised its situation and its bad repute, so he understands it's got a bad reputation, this area. The ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half-naked, drunken, slipshod, ugly. Alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged, almost like vomited up, their offences of smell and dirt and life. upon the straggling streets, and the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth and misery. Now, there really is something of the kind of Victorian connection between morality and location in this description. It's the sort of location that gives rise to the feral, scowling, wretched, wolfish children of ignorance and want. And it's that connection. It reminds me of Charles Booth's poverty maps. And that sense that in London in the Victorian period, Charles Booth was really, I suppose, an early sociologist, an early anthropologist, if you will, studying the connection between geographical location and poverty. And he basically mapped out the areas and regions and streets of London and kind of marked them up for the level of wealth of the inhabitants. So you can still see it. It's a fantastic full searchable scanned copy of the map that's available on online. I think it's on the British Library website. If I remember, I'll include a link in the show notes. But what that demonstrates is the close proximity of wealthy areas to areas of extreme, really serious deprivation. Look at the language here: reeked, disgorged, their offences, smell, dirt, crime, filth, misery. You know, this is where, in effect, kind of Scrooge's possessions end up. They're not cared for. They're not looked after. He's got no one to pass them to. They're flogged off for an extra little bit of cash. Okay, depressing. This is the legacy that he's leaving behind. And in fact, these streets are, in part, reeking with crime, with filth and misery because of the callous and misanthropic attitudes, miserly attitudes of people like Ebenezer Scrooge. Okay, they are man's. It's our behavior that's causing the streets to be like this. And then, moving on from that, finally, the spirit guides Scrooge to maybe the most haunting of the settings, certainly the most typically Gothic. It's a neglected London graveyard. As they enter an iron gate, Dickens describes the graveyard starkly, a churchyard. Here, then, the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and weeds, the growth of vegetation's death, not life, choked up with too much burying, fat with repleted appetite. A worthy place. Now, this worthy place is anything but. It's cramped between buildings, it's grown wild, it's neglected. Scrooge sees his own gravestone, and on the stone of the neglected grave, he famously reads his name, Ebenezer Scrooge. This location, an overgrown plot in the middle of the living city, symbolizes the lonely end that awaits him if he doesn't change. The weeds, the references to decay, show that no one cares to tend this place. Dickens is making the setting here a mirror of Scrooge's soul and behaviour in life. Just as his grave lies forgotten, so will his legacy, unless he changes. Finally, The Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come shows Scrooge, the Cratchit family, after Tiny Tim's death. In Stave 4, we see a tender, sorrowful scene in Bob Cratchit's humble little home. When Bob returns, the family is very quiet around the fire. Tiny Tim's mother says, "I've known him to walk. I have known him to walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed." And Bob breaks down crying, "My little child." There's no elaborate location description here. The setting is the same simple room from the earlier Stave 3. But in this context now, it is shrouded in grief. Dickens has transformed the warm home marked by Christmas cheer into one of grief and loss. And yet even here, Bob tenderly remarks about the boy's grave, Tiny Tim's grave. "It would have done you good to see how green a place it is." Green. It's a word that shows nature still tends to the resting place with kindness. The contrast of this loving family room with Scrooge's lonely office, the contrast between the two graves, the worthy place of Scrooge's resting place and the green place of Tiny Tim's resting place, underscores those themes of family and compassion, or indeed Scrooge's lack of the two things. family, and compassion. In a city full of grand buildings and cold streets, Dickens finds the real human drama in this tiny, tiny place, this tiny home with its modest hearth. It's humble yet affectionate, pointing just to how much Scrooge still must learn about valuing life. And then we move to the final stanza, the final stave, stave 5, the end of it. We've got a bright morning and renewed London life. When Scrooge awakens on Christmas morning, a changed man, the physical world reflects this transformation. He rushes to open the curtains, and what does he find? No fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial, stirring, golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet fresh air, merry bells. The once dreary London morning is now clear and full of celebration. The church bells ring, the lustiest peals he'd ever heard. Clash, clang, hammer, ding dong, bell, marking the joyful day. Scrooge runs to the window, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes, completely enchanted now by the cheerful scene, the metamorphosis complete. The cold, crisp air, the bright sunshine, and festive noises symbolize hope and moral renewal. The London that seemed so oppressive and gloomy and grim is now clear and bright and jovial. As Scrooge walks the streets, a new man, he's quite a baby, the setting continues to brim with Christmas cheer. People were pouring forth from churches and homes, greeting him with smiles. Dickens notes even that as Scrooge walked with his hands behind him, he regarded everyone with a delighted smile. Even strangers call out, "Good morning, a Merry Christmas to you." And of course, Scrooge gladly replies. He sees groups of carolers and happy families. The city itself is friendly now. Dickens also describes Scrooge looking into kitchens and homes. He pats children on the head. He questions beggars and looks down into the kitchen of houses and up to the windows. Notice that he's now paying attention. Mankind, to quote Marley, is now his business. Every corner of the city for Scrooge has become an opportunity to spread and demonstrate kindness and show his interest in the world and other human beings. It's a change in how Scrooge views places, whether they're lonely shops to inviting homes, and it's showing the novel's key theme that the spirit of Christmas can transform people and their environment. The same streets and rooms that once felt bleak all the way back in the first stave are now alive with laughter and generosity. Scrooge's own new activity in London also ties setting in with social responsibility. Scrooge buys the largest turkey from a corner poulterer, someone who sells poultry or birds for eating, and it is delivered to the Cratchits anonymously, brightening the Cratchit home with the joy and abundance of Christmas. He gives a big donations, a great many back payments to the charity gentleman that he refused to donate to on Christmas Eve. And when he visits Fred's home, he finds a wonderful party full of games and, quote, wonderful happiness. Dickens presents Fred's warm, bustling house as the epitome of Christmas cheer. Finally, the next morning, Scrooge arrives early at the office to catch Bob Cratchit coming late and surprises Bob joyfully, wonderfully by raising his salary. The office setting, once grim, is now the site of generosity. These shifts in place and attitude demonstrate that Dickens believes any locale, any location, whether a counting house or a London street, can become warm and humane when people act, when they choose to act with love and compassion. Across all 5 staves, Dickens carefully connects setting to theme. Think about the physical locations. Icy London fog to cosy homes, lonely graveyards to bright sunshine and bustling streets. They're not just backdrops, but they are mirrors of Scrooge's soul. They're mirrors of the soul of other characters, but also of society's values. The misery of the poor in dank, gloomy, disgusting tenements the joy of families by the hearth, the revelry of Christmas markets, the silence, oppressive silence of a neglected, overgrown grave. Each place amplifies the novel's message about the importance of human connection and social responsibility. By the end of this moral journey, Scrooge's transformed perception of place, seeing London in light rather than shadow, makes concrete Dickens's moral of the book, the moral of the book, that by embracing charity and love, even the bleakest and gloomiest settings can be filled and transformed by the spirit of Christmas.